Christmas night had come with an unexpected fury. The blizzard struck Detroit with little warning, a violent windstorm that shredded the streets with ice and snow. As the city's lights flickered under the heavy snow, one house remained unaffected by the storm's rage. A small, lonely house at the end of Maple Street, where 32-year-old Emma Johnson sat in the dark. The sound of the wind howling outside was muffled by the walls of her small home, but inside, the cold was cutting through every crack in the window and door. Emma sat at her kitchen table, her hands shaking slightly as she counted the crumpled bills laid out in front of her. $7.32. That was all that stood between her 2-year-old son, Liam, and an empty stomach come morning. With no heat, no electricity, and no real way to make a change, Emma was simply trying to hold everything together. She stared at her son, who was wrapped in blankets in the corner of the room, curled up on a makeshift bed made of couch cushions and blankets. The stove's warmth was the only thing keeping him from freezing in the dark. But even with the little warmth, Emma could feel the icy fingers of despair clawing at her heart. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her eyes, trying to fight back the tears, knowing that no matter how hard she worked, no matter how many jobs she took, it was never enough. The world seemed to have forgotten about people like her. The other homes down the street, in the quieter part of Maple Street, were warm and well-kept. Families who lived there gave her sidelong glances, whispers always trailing behind her as she passed. She didn't belong here, and the longer she stayed, the more it felt like the world was closing in on her. Her ex-husband, Blake, had walked out on her and Liam 8 months ago, saying he needed to find himself. But what he had found was a 23-year-old waitress in Tennessee, along with the comfort of not paying child support. As her son slept, Emma wondered if Blake ever thought about the little boy he abandoned, about the child he swore he'd protect. The divorce papers, sealed with their finality, sat untouched on the refrigerator, her only connection to the man who had once promised to stand by her side. Her phone buzzed suddenly, and she jumped. The message from her manager at the cleaning company was blunt and cold. "Don't bother coming in tomorrow. We're letting you go. Your kid was crying too much during your shift yesterday." Customers complained. Emma stared at the message, disbelief washing over her. The third job she had lost in just 2 months. The laundromat had fired her when Liam got sick, and she had to bring him in. The diner had let her go when she fell asleep from exhaustion after working 18 hours straight. "How am I supposed to work if I can't find anyone to watch you, baby?" she whispered, staring at the sleeping boy in the corner. The clock on the cracked kitchen wall ticked away, mocking her in the silence of the room. She needed help. She needed something to change, to save her, but there was nothing. Nothing but the stinging cold and the weight of another day surviving. Suddenly, Emma's eyes drifted to a box on the top shelf of her cabinet, her mother's recipe box. The yellowed index card within it contained the secrets to recipes that had been passed down for generations. One of them a special fried chicken recipe that her mother had always said would save her one day. Emma's hands shook as she reached up, the weight of her mother's words filling her mind. That secret blend of spices has been in our family for generations. One day, when times get tough, that recipe might just save you. She smiled bitterly, not fully believing it, but too desperate to dismiss it. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the lifeline she needed. The storm raged outside, but inside, Emma made her decision. The storm outside had become a full-blown blizzard by the time Emma woke the next morning. The house, once a haven, now felt more like a cage. The small kitchen, where she had spent the previous night contemplating her next move, was colder than ever. But despite the biting cold, Emma had a plan. She was going to make her mother's famous fried chicken, use her last bit of money to buy whatever ingredients she could, and try again. She wrapped Liam in extra blankets and sat him in his high chair, hoping the warmth from the oven could ease his discomfort. There was no heat in the house, but at least she could keep the stove going, boiling water to create some warmth. Emma stood at the window, staring out into the chaos of the blizzard. A sense of dread loomed over her. The few customers who had come by her tiny makeshift restaurant had not returned. The dream of reopening her mother's soul food business seemed further and further out of reach. Suddenly, There was a loud bang on the door. Emma's heart skipped a beat. In all her years living here, no one had ever come to her door during a snowstorm, least of all strangers, let alone strangers on motorcycles. She froze. The wind howled, sending snowflakes into the gaps of the window frame. Emma's instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, to lock the door and ignore whoever was out there. But then came another knock, this time more insistent, followed by a voice that made her stomach twist in fear. "Ma'am, we need help. We're freezing out here." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She pressed her back to the wall, holding Liam tightly in her arms. The voice outside was rough, tired. It didn't sound like a threat, but Emma had no way of knowing who these people were or what they wanted. The knock came again. 3 hard raps that echoed through the house. Liam stirred in her arms, his tiny face scrunched in confusion. Emma's mind raced as she thought about the stories she had heard, stories about the Hell's Angels and their infamous reputation. The thought of opening her door to 25 men on motorcycles in the middle of a snowstorm filled her with terror. But then, she thought about her mother's words. "When someone's in trouble, you help them." Emma closed her eyes, feeling a rush of conflicting emotions. She could run. She could pretend she didn't hear the knocking. But the fear that gripped her heart wasn't enough to quell the pull of compassion. These men, whoever they were just as desperate as she was. Maybe more. As if on instinct, she moved toward the door. Liam's tiny hands clung to her as she moved, sensing her anxiety. With one last breath, Emma unlocked the door, her heart pounding. When she opened the door, what she saw took her by surprise. Standing there in the swirling snow were 25 men, their faces obscured by helmets and scarves. The leader, a towering man with a thick beard and sharp eyes, stood at the front, looking directly at her. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a brief moment, they shared a silent understanding. "We're not looking for trouble," the man said, his voice carrying over the howling wind. "We just need a place to wait out the storm. We're freezing out here." Emma hesitated, her mind racing. She had no idea who these people were, but she could see their shivering bodies, the dark stains on their jackets from the wet snow. One of the men stumbled, nearly falling into the snow, and another reached out to steady him. These weren't the dangerous criminals she had expected. These were people in distress, desperate for warmth and shelter. Liam coughed in her arms, his small body still cold from the night before, and Emma's heart broke. She had been afraid of letting strangers in. But if she didn't, if she turned them away, could she live with herself? Could she risk them dying out there when she had the chance to help? The man at the front stepped forward, his eyes softening. "We'll leave as soon as the storm passes. We just need to get warm." Emma's thoughts raced, and the memory of her mother's wisdom flooded her mind once more. You help them, because one day you might need help too. Without a word, Emma stepped aside. "Come in, before you freeze to death." As the first of the bikers entered, Emma couldn't help but notice the quiet respect in their movements. They weren't the wild outlaws she had imagined. They were disciplined, careful not to disturb anything in her modest home. One by one, the 25 men filed inside, shaking off snow, stamping their boots, and offering words of gratitude. Emma watched, still uncertain but willing to give them a chance. Liam's eyes widened as the men settled around the room. He peeked out from behind Emma, still clinging to her, unsure of the strangers. The man who had spoken earlier, Ethan, turned to Emma and smiled. "Thank you. We won't forget this." The small house, which had once felt impossibly empty, now felt even smaller. 25 large men filled every available space, their leather jackets and weathered faces standing in stark contrast to the warmth that now filled the room. Emma stood by the door, watching in silence as the men moved carefully, avoiding any sudden movements, and greeted her with quiet gratitude. She still couldn't shake the unease settling in her stomach. But the warmth of their thankfulness was undeniable, and for the first time in days, Emma felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Hope. Liam, who had been clutching his mother's leg the entire time, finally found the courage to step forward. The noise in the room, a mix of gruff voices and shuffling feet, seemed to lull him into curiosity. His tiny eyes widened as he took in the men around him, their faces hidden behind helmets, except for the few who removed them, revealing weathered, scarred skin. Emma's heart skipped as Liam reached out for one of the men. The man, Tommy, was seated near the stove, trying to warm his frozen hands. When Liam approached him, Tommy smiled softly, despite his exhaustion, and nodded at the boy. "Hey there, little guy," Tommy said in a deep voice that was surprisingly gentle. "You look like you're thinking of something to say." Liam, too young to understand the tension in the air, merely pointed at Tommy's helmet. "Big hats," he said, his voice full of wonder. The other men chuckled, and for a moment, Emma felt the tension in her shoulders ease. The bikers weren't the dangerous men she had feared. They were in their own way, just as human as she was. Tommy reached down, placing a large hand on Liam's head, and ruffled his hair gently. "We're not all bad, kid," he said, his voice warm. "Not all of us are what they say we are." The words stung Emma in a way she hadn't expected. The neighborhood had long since labeled her as one of them, the single mother, the outcast. She had lived for years with the whispers, the sideways glances, the judgment from her neighbors. Even Mrs. White, the neighbor who had once ignored her pleas for help, had treated her with disdain. But now, here were 25 men, hardened by life and still showing kindness to her son. It was a strange, almost surreal feeling. As the evening wore on, the group settled into a strange camaraderie. Ethan, the man who had spoken first, had taken charge of arranging the small space. He didn't seem like a leader in the traditional sense, no demanding tone, no air of superiority. But when he spoke, people listened. They quickly gathered around, spreading out to different parts of the house, setting their helmets and jackets down in the corners. The room began to feel less like a cramped shelter and more like a gathering. In the kitchen, Mike, a towering figure with a thick beard, took it upon himself to help Emma. He had noticed her earlier when she had pulled out ingredients for her fried chicken, the very same recipe her mother had passed down to her. Mike stood near her, his hand steady as he offered help. "You know," Mike said quietly, his voice rough but kind, "I haven't had a home-cooked meal in ages. You mind if I pitch in?" Emma hesitated but nodded. The warmth from his presence, despite his intimidating appearance, was oddly reassuring. "Sure," she said, her voice quieter than usual. "I'm trying to make a little something, but I'm not sure it'll be enough." "It'll be enough," he assured her, flashing a gentle grin. "You'd be surprised how many of us appreciate the kind of meal that comes with love." As they worked side by side, Emma found herself loosening up. The men moved through the house with a quiet discipline that was almost mesmerizing. They weren't loud or rowdy. They didn't try to dominate the space. Instead, they simply made themselves as small as possible, aware that they were guests in her home. The sounds of Liam laughing as he played with a toy on the floor and the gentle chatter in the kitchen gradually soothed Emma's nerves. Then, out of nowhere, Tommy appeared at her side, holding a steaming bowl of soup. He smiled, handing it to her with a kind gesture. "You've got a good thing going here. Just needed some warmth." "You've got a beautiful family," he said. Emma couldn't help but smile, a small tear escaping her eye. For the first time in months, she felt seen, felt like someone actually cared about her. But there was still a heavy weight on her chest, a reminder that all of this could end once the storm passed. Once they left, in the midst of this unlikely gathering, Mike reappeared, and with him came Jake, who was carrying a stack of blankets. They set up beds for the men on the floor, one by one, making sure they had enough space. Emma couldn't help but notice that they were all doing this without asking for anything in return. "Thank you," she said quietly as she handed out bowls of her mother's chicken soup, each bite a taste of something familiar. "No need to thank us," Mike said with a soft smile. "You showed us what kindness really is. We're just returning the favor." As the night drew on and the storm continued to rage outside, Emma watched as the bikers settled in. Liam, now fully relaxed in the warmth of the room, curled up on the couch, his small body at ease for the first time in days. The house had become something it hadn't been in a long while, a home. Not just for Emma and Liam, but for these men who, in her eyes, were strangers. But as the evening wore on, They had become something more, friends. The storm raged through the night, its howling winds and driving snow creating a wall of white outside. But inside Emma's small house, there was an unexpected warmth. As the hours passed, the men drifted off to sleep one by one. The living room was quiet now, filled only with the soft murmurs of men trying to find comfort in a place that wasn't their own. Emma, exhausted but unable to sleep, kept a watchful eye on Liam as he slept soundly beside her. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe, the weight of constant worry lifting, if only for a little while. By the time the first light of dawn broke through the snowstorm, Emma awoke to a sense of stillness. The storm had not yet passed, but the house was no longer filled with the same tension it had carried the night before. The bikers had settled in, making themselves as comfortable as they could on the floor, while Mike, ever the leader, quietly coordinated the group's next steps. It was clear they weren't just looking for shelter anymore. They had become part of Emma's world, however temporary that might be. The house was still cold, and Liam stirred from his sleep, rubbing his eyes and reaching out for his mother. Emma picked him up, gently rocking him in her arms, trying to maintain some semblance of calm as the uncertainty of their future loomed over her. She was still unsure of what this strange act of kindness from 25 strangers would mean for her. What would happen when the storm cleared? Would they leave and vanish from her life? Or would they somehow be part of her future, too? As the morning wore on, Mike walked over to Emma, his thick boots echoing against the wooden floors. His expression was softer now, his rough exterior giving way to something more human, something that showed the true weight of his gratitude. He didn't speak right away, simply watching her with an understanding that was rare, even in his line of work. "How's Liam?" Mike asked, his voice still low, but not without a hint of concern. "He's better," Emma replied quietly. "Not great, but better. I'm just trying to keep him warm." Mike nodded, looking around the small space. The house was simple, but in that moment, it was enough. There was a peace in the way everything had come together, even if it was temporary. These men, her unlikely guests, had come to her in a storm, quite literally. And now, they were helping her weather the aftermath of a different kind of storm, the one that had been raging inside her for years. "I want to help you, Emma," Mike said, his voice steady with a new determination. "We didn't come here just to escape the storm. We came because you opened your door to us. We don't forget things like that." Emma's heart skipped at the sincerity in his words. It was one thing to be kind when the world was calm, but to extend a hand when everything around you was falling apart. This was something else. Mike wasn't just thanking her for the shelter. He was recognizing something deeper, something that Emma hadn't allowed herself to recognize in years, that she was worthy of support, of kindness, of love. After a long pause, Mike spoke again. "We'll need to leave when the storm clears, but we'll help you. All of us. You're not alone anymore, Emma." She swallowed the lump in her throat, feeling the tears threaten to fall. For so long, she had carried everything on her shoulders alone. Her son's well-being, her future, the weight of a broken past. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel alone. "You don't have to help," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. I never expected anyone to come for us. To help me. Sometimes," Mike said quietly, "we don't know we need help until someone else steps in. You did it for us, Emma. We'll do it for you." That night, as the storm raged on, Emma allowed herself to rest, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion she had been fighting for weeks. But even as she laid down beside Liam, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing, something deep within her, and maybe even within the whole neighborhood. Outside, the storm howled and cracked against the house, but inside, Emma finally felt safe. The warmth in the room wasn't just from the stove, the blankets, or the food she had cooked. It came from the bond she was beginning to build with these men, with Mike, and with the small community she had tried so hard to ignore. By the time the storm cleared, it was early Christmas morning. The first rays of weak sunlight broke through the thick clouds, casting a dim glow over Emma's small house. The snow outside had tapered off, but the damage had already been done. The storm had changed everything. As Emma stood by the window, Looking out at the blanket of white, she noticed something that sent a shiver down her spine. Nothing was the same anymore. Her guests, the men who had come in from the storm, had transformed the house during the night. There was a quiet efficiency in the way they worked, organizing and clearing space without disturbing her. As the storm settled, Emma noticed that several of the bikers had been up early, tidying up and preparing for the departure that was inevitable. They weren't leaving without giving something back. "Mike told us you could use some help," Tommy said as he entered the kitchen. His rough exterior was softened by the gentle concern in his eyes as he handed her a steaming cup of coffee. "We've been calling in some favors." Emma raised an eyebrow, confused but intrigued. "Favors?" Before she could ask further, the sound of motorcycles revving from outside caught her attention. She walked to the window, her eyes widening as the first of the bikes appeared. More bikers, but this time there were even more than the 25 from the night before. The thundering sound of engines filled the air as a full convoy of motorcycles rolled up to her street. "Are those?" Emma whispered, hardly able to comprehend what was happening. "They're friends of ours," Mike said with a grin. "Came down to help." Emma's heart pounded in her chest as more bikes pulled up, followed by trucks and even construction vehicles. Mike's words suddenly made sense. These weren't just a few people willing to help. They were bringing an entire army of resources. As she stood there, overwhelmed, one of the bikers, Jake, appeared at the door with a large toolbox in hand. "We've got construction workers on the way, too. Plumbers, electricians, contractors, everything you need. We're going to make sure this place is as good as new." Emma stood frozen, her mouth dry, trying to process the sheer scale of what was unfolding. Liam toddled over to her, his small hands tugging at her leg. The sight of him, so innocent and unaware of the monumental shift that had just taken place, made Emma's heart ache. "Mama, bikes," he said with a smile, pointing excitedly at the growing line of motorcycles outside. Emma crouched down to his level, her eyes filling with tears. The kindness she had shown, the simple decision to open her door to strangers in need, had snowballed into something incredible, something that would change her life and the life of Liam forever. Mike walked up beside her, his gaze soft but steady. "You did more than just give shelter. You gave us hope." Emma felt a lump in her throat. These words, hope, help, family, sounded too good to be true. She had always struggled, always felt alone in this world. But now, here she was, surrounded by a group of people who had come from all over to give her the one thing she had longed for: support. The trucks began unloading, and the bikers quickly set to work. Some of them moved to the back of the house to begin repairs on the kitchen, while others worked on the roof, reinforcing the structure to withstand future storms. Emma, still in shock, could only stand and watch, her emotions flooding her senses. Jake came over, wiping sweat from his brow, and smiled at her. "We got a full crew coming to work on the restaurant, too. Your mom's recipes deserve a place that matches the quality of the food." Emma could hardly find the words. She glanced around at the men who were now completely focused on her small house, transforming it into something she had never imagined possible. The bikers, once strangers, were working with a precision and dedication that rivaled any professional team. They had become her family, her support system, when she had been on the brink of giving up. As the day wore on, more and more people arrived to help. The neighborhood began to take notice. Neighbors, once cold and distant, started gathering near her house, watching the transformation unfold. It wasn't long before Mrs. Henderson, the woman who had once treated her with disdain, came outside, her face pale but intrigued. Emma watched her from the window, unsure of how to feel. The woman had never shown any kindness toward her, and yet, now, she was here, watching the miracle that was taking place right outside her door. There was a moment of hesitation before Mrs. Henderson approached the house, her steps tentative. "Emma," she called out, her voice soft but carrying over the noise of the construction. I just wanted to say, I didn't realize," she trailed off, her words faltering. Emma walked outside, her heart heavy with the weight of the past. "Understand," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's been a hard time for all of us. But we can change that. Maybe this is a start." Mrs. Henderson looked down at her feet, her cheeks reddening. "I was wrong about you," she admitted quietly. "I've judged you without understanding." Emma nodded, her heart still guarded but softened by the sincerity in Mrs. Henderson's voice. "We all make mistakes," she said. "What matters is what we do going forward." As the day came to an end, Emma stood at the threshold of her home, watching the bikers pack up, their work finished for the day. The house was no longer cold and empty. It was filled with warmth, with the smell of freshly cooked food and the promise of a new beginning. But as the bikers prepared to leave, Mike pulled Emma aside, his face serious. "We'll be back tomorrow," he said, "and so will the rest of the crew. This place needs more than just repairs. It needs love. And we're here to make sure you get it." The next morning, Emma awoke to a world that had somehow shifted overnight. The storm had cleared, but what had followed was something far more remarkable, a transformation she could hardly believe. When she stepped outside, the neighborhood looked nothing like it had just 24 hours ago. The snow was still heavy on the ground, but the scene in front of her was one of organized chaos, as if a miracle had unfurled right before her eyes. Dozens of trucks, each laden with construction materials, were parked along the street. The air was filled with the sounds of saws cutting, hammers striking, and the occasional shout of a worker coordinating with someone else. The bikers, her unexpected helpers, were busy at work, determined to make her small house something extraordinary. The first time she had opened her door to these strangers, she never imagined she would be witnessing something like this. Mike was there, as always, leading the charge. He stood in front of her house with Tommy and Jake, both men carrying large wooden planks to the back of the house. Mike caught her eye, his expression more serious than usual, but with a deep sense of satisfaction. "We're not just fixing things, Emma," he said as he approached her. "We're building something that'll last." Emma's chest tightened, a mix of disbelief and awe bubbling up inside her. For the first time in ages, she felt something close to hope. Real hope. Mike wasn't just talking about her house. He was talking about her life. This was a grand gesture, far more than she had ever imagined possible. And it was all because of a single decision she had made one snowy night. A decision to offer shelter to 25 men who, in their own way, had given her back something she'd thought was lost forever, her belief in people. As she watched the men work, Liam by her side, she felt the weight of the past several months lifting off her shoulders. The days of cold isolation, of feeling invisible in a world that seemed to have no place for her, were slowly slipping away. The bikers, her unexpected family, had not only made her house warmer, but they had made her world feel full again. Liam smiled up at her, his little hands clapping in delight as he watched Tommy raise the new beams that would become part of the restaurant's frame. The neighborhood, too, began to take notice. People once hesitant or outright judgmental started to trickle out of their homes. They watched from their windows, then began to gather on the sidewalk, taking in the transformation. Whispers passed between the neighbors, some with open curiosity, others with disbelief. And then, just as Mike had promised, the heavy equipment arrived. A construction team of local contractors, called in by the bikers, set up shop in front of Emma's house, completely transforming the space before her eyes. They brought in industrial-grade tools, reinforced the foundation, and began designing the layout for the restaurant that had once existed only in Emma's dreams. It was no longer just a home. It was becoming a place of possibility. Around midday, Emma heard the rumble of engines in the distance. Her heart skipped a beat as she looked toward the street. It wasn't just the bikers returning for more work. It was the full force of the Hells Angels community. Hundreds of them had arrived, each bearing supplies, tools, and a willingness to help. Mike, standing next to her, watched her expression as she took it all in. "This is what it means to belong," he said, his voice low, but full of conviction. More than 1,500 bikers had traveled from all over the country to make this happen. Some had come with their own trucks, while others arrived on motorcycles, ready to lend a hand in whatever way they could. Emma's eyes widened as she saw familiar faces in the crowd, men she had fed and sheltered only days ago. Tommy was there, walking toward her with a large grin plastered across his face. "We've got a team for every project, Emma," he said, his voice brimming with pride. "This place is going to be everything you've dreamed of." Emma's breath caught at her throat as she took in the overwhelming scene. The bikers, despite their rough exteriors, were working together like a well-oiled machine. They were organized, efficient, and above all, they were determined. They were no longer strangers to her. They were family, the kind of family she had always longed for. The community she had built in her small corner of the world, despite the hardship, was now blossoming before her eyes. The news vans began to arrive, cameras rolling, eager to capture the heartwarming story of this miraculous transformation. The press had gotten wind of what was happening on Maple Street, and the entire neighborhood was watching, including Mrs. Henderson, who, after days of avoiding Emma, had come outside to witness the change. Her face was a mix of confusion and something deeper, something like recognition, as she watched the bikers work side by side with the community members. I never thought this would happen," she whispered under her breath, watching the men hammer nails into place, their hands steady and skilled. As the afternoon wore on, the structure of the restaurant began to take shape. The old kitchen, which had been cramped and inefficient, was now being replaced with a state-of-the-art cooking area, equipped with everything Emma could have hoped for. The walls were being reinforced, and windows were added, letting in streams of sunlight that bathed the space in warmth. It was no longer a cramped, cold house at the end of Maple Street. It was a bustling, vibrant space where the dreams of Emma's past and present were merging into a beautiful future. Mike appeared at her side once more, his eyes sparkling with the same warmth and kindness that had been present when he had first knocked on her door. "Emma, you have no idea what this means," he said quietly, handing her a small envelope. "This is from everyone, every chapter, every person who helped. It's yours, and it's not charity. It's a token of our gratitude." Emma held the envelope in her hand, feeling its weight. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it to find cash inside, a substantial amount. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. "We don't forget," Mike continued. "We don't forget those who open their hearts. You gave us a place to stay when we needed it. Now, we're giving you the chance to keep your dream alive, and we're not stopping until it's done right." The days that followed were a blur of activity and progress. The streets of Maple Street, once quiet and desolate, were now alive with the sounds of construction, laughter, and the clatter of tools. The bikers, along with Emma's supportive neighbors, had transformed her small, run-down house into a thriving space. What had begun as a simple act of kindness, a woman opening her door to 25 strangers, had now blossomed into something far greater than she could have ever imagined. By the end of the week, Mama Kesha's kitchen was no longer just a dream. It was a reality. The walls were freshly painted, the kitchen fully equipped, and the dining area expanded with comfortable seating for customers. The smells of frying chicken and seasoned vegetables wafted through the house, mixing with the fresh paint and the faint scent of new wood. The space was warm, both literally and figuratively. It was a home that Emma had built not just for herself and Liam, but for an entire community. The bikers, true to their word, had left their mark, literally and figuratively, on the restaurant. They had given their time, their energy, and their resources to ensure that Emma's dream of serving soul food in a welcoming space would come true. What had begun as a gesture to help a woman in need had turned into a full-fledged mission to support and uplift. On the morning of the grand opening, the sun shone brightly over Maple Street, casting a warm glow on the freshly renovated storefront. Emma stood outside, looking at the sign that now hung proudly above the door, Mama Kesha's Kitchen, where love is the secret ingredient. Liam clung to her leg, his eyes wide with excitement, while Mike and Tommy stood beside her, both smiling in approval. "You ready?" Mike asked, his deep voice carrying a sense of finality, as if the work they'd done together had finally come to fruition. "I don't think I've ever been this ready," Emma replied, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you all for this, for everything." "We don't need thanks," Tommy said with a wink, his face softening as he looked at her. You did this for us first. We just made sure you had the space to do it for others." The door swung open, and the first customers began to arrive, some familiar faces from the neighborhood, other strangers who had heard about the restaurant through word of mouth, news reports, and the buzz that had spread across Detroit. There was a hum of excitement in the air, a palpable sense of anticipation as people filled the seats inside, eager to taste the soul food that had become a symbol of hope, resilience, and community. Emma moved between the tables, serving plates of crispy fried chicken, collard greens, mashed potatoes, and cornbread. She felt a sense of fulfillment with every smile she received, every compliment on her cooking, and every new face that walked through the door. This wasn't just about food. It was about connection. It was about people coming together, sharing a meal, and realizing that despite their differences, they were all part of the same human experience. As the evening drew near, the energy in the restaurant grew, with families laughing, neighbors catching up, and Mike and the other bikers sitting in the corner, content with their work. It was clear that their mission had been accomplished. The Hells Angels hadn't just helped her renovate a house. They had helped her rebuild her life. Later that night, as the last customer left and Emma began to clean up, Mike approached her with a small envelope in hand. He held it out to her with a grin. "You've earned this," he said. Emma opened the envelope, her eyes widening as she saw the check inside. It was enough to pay off the rest of her bills and finally fix the remaining problems with her home. But more than that, it was a gesture of recognition, a symbol of the bond that had been created between her and these men, these strangers who had become family. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Mike said. "You've already said it all through your actions. You opened your heart when no one else would." The next few days brought an outpouring of support. The community rallied behind Mama Kesha's kitchen, and the customers kept coming. Emma's dream was no longer just hers. It had become a part of the fabric of Maple Street, a beacon of hope for everyone who had been touched by her kindness and perseverance. But the most meaningful moments were the small, intimate ones. The laughter of Liam as he ran around the restaurant, now comfortable in a world where he was safe and loved. The quiet conversations Emma shared with her customers, many of whom had come from far and wide to experience the food and the story behind it. And, of course, the bond she had formed with the bikers, who had promised to visit regularly and continue supporting her. As the weeks turned into months, Mama Kesha's kitchen flourished. It became a staple in the neighborhood, a place where people could come together, share stories, and create memories. Emma's story spread beyond Detroit, inspiring others to extend a hand to those in need and to realize that kindness was the key to unlocking the future. The neighborhood, too, had transformed. The walls that had once separated neighbors, creating division and suspicion, began to crumble as people came together, united by the sense of community that had been cultivated in Emma's kitchen. The once quiet street was now filled with the sounds of laughter, conversation, and the comforting hum of shared humanity. As for Emma, she no longer felt like an outsider in her own life. She had found her place, not just in the world, but in the hearts of those around her. The lesson her mother had taught her, that kindness always comes back, had come full circle. And as Liam grew, he would carry with him the story of how his mother had opened the door to strangers on a snowy night, how she had been kind when no one else was, and how that one act of courage had changed their lives forever. The world may have been filled with storms, but Emma had found a way to weather them. And in doing so, she had built something far stronger than just a restaurant. She had built a family. Let us know where you're watching from if you enjoyed this story. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more thrilling, cinematic stories just like this one. Here's a quick question for you. What do you think is the most powerful act of kindness you've ever witnessed? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Sometimes a small gesture of kindness is all it takes to change the world. What would you do if you were in Emma's shoes?